The views expressed on the following show may not be those of the hosts, guests, or WSPN Skidmore Radio. Talk Saratoga is produced by Saratoga Broadcasting Incorporated and may not be reproduced in part or in whole unless expressed written approval is given. Now, here are the hosts of Talk Saratoga, Rick Thompson and a Saratoga All-Star.
Good morning and welcome to Talk Saratoga. And it's a lousy day today. We're expecting thunderstorms and a lot of rain, and it's oppressive heat outside. But we're nice and cool in here, and we've got a great guest this morning, Dave Karpinski. Morning, Dave.
Good morning, Rick.
And Dave, you are the director of the Parkhurst Field Foundation, correct?
That is correct.
Well, wait a minute. Executive director. I got to give you the proper term. Dave, I grew up in Gloversville, so I'm familiar with Parkhurst Field and what it meant to myself as a kid playing Little League down there. Why don't you tell us a little bit of history, or quite a bit of history, because there is a lot of history in Parkhurst Field. So why don't you take it away and give us some information?
Well, I'll thank you. I'll start with really how the genesis of Parkhurst Field Foundation, the story of how we stumbled on the history of Parkhurst Field is a story in and of itself. As 60 years plus of families in the Gloversville area played at Parkhurst Field on Harrison Street, I too, as a dad, participated and joined the board. My son started playing down there when he was about 7 years old, and upon joining the board, I offered as a marketing guy at heart, I offered to start doing a little bit of research on the history of the park, really the Little League history, to build up the story and be able to get local grants and really work on the infrastructure of the park. And so it started as a community-based project, really just trying to put together, why should we continue to support the Little League? What we stumbled upon in the process, this is about 2010 when we started, what we stumbled on in the process was uncovering the fact that this park is actually one of a kind in the entire country. And that really was the start of Parkhurst Field Foundation.
Sure. And your look into the history of it.
Yeah, so we started doing research, and we knew that there were stories about major league teams coming to Gloversville. We didn't really know where they played, and at the turn of the century, the early 1900s. And it wasn't until we uncovered one article from the early 20s when the Reds came to town. It referenced that it was the first time that a major league team had come to town since the great Honus Wagner about 20 years earlier. Well, for the people who don't recognize the Honus Wagner name, he's a Hall of Famer, played for the Pittsburgh Pirates, and he also has the distinction of the most expensive baseball card you can own, multi-million-dollar baseball card. But they uncovered in this article was a little nugget of the Pittsburgh team coming to town and playing against the Jags at AJ&G Park. Okay. Well, nobody in 2010 knew what AJ&G Park was and who the Jags were. So that really was the rabbit hole that we went down. Okay. We had to figure it out.
And they were?
So as it turns out, the Jags were a minor league affiliate of the Brooklyn Superbas, who became the Brooklyn Dodgers eventually. They were basically a minor league team that the Jags stood for Johnstown, Amsterdam, Gloversville. And the park that they played in was built specially for them in 1906. And that was called the AJ&G Park. Not really fancy names, but the FJ&G Railroad was the one who built the park for to sell more tickets on the train, to create a destination. Of course, people in the Fulton County area know about Sport Island, which is up on the Saratoga. So it was very common for railroads to own destinations so they can increase ridership and get people there. So they build this park for the Jags, who up until then had played actually in Johnstown. And so they build this state of the art park that had 1,500 person grandstand. They said it was better than some of the major league parks at the time, and they opened this thing up in 1906 to a lot of fanfare. In fact, this weekend, tomorrow that we're talking, and I think this is airing next week, but this weekend that we're talking is the 114th anniversary of them opening that park for the Jags.
Neat. That's interesting. And one of the reasons, that I always look at, especially in our area, because when New York State was founded, or the area was founded, anywhere near the water is where cities sprang up, because it was that was the mode of traveling back then. So our area was rich in history because of the Mohawk River. But with the coming of the railroad age, if you were located near a station, you also grew because of the travel passengers it could bring with it. That's why our leather industry was so big, because you could get people, you could get workers, materials there faster. So the railroad was one of the reasons why our area, grew so fast and was able to attract all these baseball teams and people.
Well, it was the major transportation. It was the major economic driving engine to move goods from point A to point B. So everybody knows the FJ&G Railroad was a centerpiece of the growth of that area. But it was also the railroad, because it was the mode of transportation. It was also really a major part of the story of the growth of what became Parkhurst Field, and it becoming the destination that it was. So you've got this great local team called the Jags that are playing there. The Jags are part of this New York State League, which included Utica, Syracuse, Binghamton, Scranton, Wilkes-Barre, and Albany. So this is a state, they call it the New York State League, and you got teams coming in by railroad to play from point A to point B. What's interesting is barnstorming baseball, which had really just started in the early 1900s, was a way for major league teams at the time to make money between points A and points B and pay for their travel. And because this park was state-of-the-art, right in the heart of industrial upstate New York, many of those teams stopped in Gloversville on their way to their destination to play exhibition games.
One of the most famous baseball people came through in this barnstorming era, Ty Cobb, correct?
No, Cy Young.
Cy Young.
Cy Young,
okay.
Not Cy Young and Honus Wagner that we just talked about, but multiple Hall of Famers. So it really, about a year after it opened, was the month of July in 1907 was really the best month of baseball any small town in America could have. It started with Cy Young and the Boston Americans coming to town at the beginning of the month, and everybody knows Cy Young. You win the Cy Young Award to this day, right? So he was the player manager on that team. He comes to town. The manager of the Jags actually had some major league experience. His name was Earl. His last name was Earl.
Okay.
And he was able to make these phone calls and telegraphs to these major league teams to bring them in. So the Boston Americans came in. One of the players on the Boston Americans was a local guy from the St. Johnsville area. So we can imagine that was part of the draw of them stopping.
Sure.
They were on their way from Boston to Detroit.
Okay.
And they had played a doubleheader the day before. This is about the midway point on their way out. You can actually imagine it playing out.
Well, when we think back to, the days of Babe Ruth and in the 20s, that was the only way they could get around was by train. And, there's so many rich stories about major league teams traveling on the train. And to know that they came through our city is kind of fascinating. And such a good history that we had. Now, we had a local connection to the Cleveland baseball team, correct?
Yeah, the center fielder for the Jags ends up going on to manage the Cleveland Naps.
Okay.
They called them Cleveland Naps. They didn't become the Indians until the teens.
Right, they didn't become the proud Cleveland Indians
Yeah.
until the teens. Okay.
So our center fielder goes and becomes a manager for that team, and in 1913 writes back to Gloversville because he was actually on the agenda to bring the Cleveland team to Gloversville in 1913. And writes back to the town and to the manager of the team and says, "Hey, really, I'm sorry, we're not going to fit this in our schedule. It's not going to work. Let's try next year." Well, on that team in 1913 was shoeless Joe Jackson.
Wow.
So that was a I'll call that a near miss.
Yeah, really.
We would have loved to have added that, but. We've had multiple Hall of Famers. I'm going to go back to 1907. The Pittsburgh team that came later in July of 1907 had Hall of Famers on the team, from Barney Dreyfuss, who was their manager, their owner, who started the first World Series just a few years before. He's a Hall of Famer. A guy named Rick Willis, some lesser knowns, and then of course the best shortstop probably of the early 1900s.
Sure.
Everybody would say Derek Jeter is now in that mix, in that conversation, but by far the best shortstop of that era was Hannes Wagner, and he played on this park, which is now Parkhurst Field.
Now, we also had connections with teams outside of the U.S., didn't we? We had you call them foreign teams, but they were teams outside of the U.S. Do you have any?
Yeah, so it's jumping into the teens a little bit in the 1910 to 1920 era. After the Jags moved, they actually moved the team to Elmira in 1908. The ballpark is still less than 5 years old. It's a gorgeous ballpark. A lot of local teams, the Danforths, took over in what I'm calling industrial league era, and in that era they had a Chinese national team come through, who were actually out of Hawaii, the University of Hawaii, and countless number of Negro League teams that came through between 1910 and 1916. So imagine the first 10 years of this park were incredible. You have major league teams, you have Negro League teams, you have international teams, all coming to the Gloversville area to play ball.
And that's amazing, because I know fans used to come over with the Chinese team, and basically, as you said, they were Hawaiian. And I remember when they had the cheerleaders, they were all in hula skirts, which was a big draw when the Hawaiian team came through. Of course, that's a legend that may not be true. I want to believe it.
Well, I'll go with it. I haven't seen it in an article yet, but I'll go with it.
I'll write the article
That's
about
fine.
it. Yeah, it's.
Some people will say history is what you make it to be,
That's
but
right. That's right.
we'll go with that.
It's pretty neat how I think from the Gloversville, Johnstown, Amsterdam area, and when baseball, of course, there were, like you said, major league teams around the country, but through the state, when they started to migrate west, I mean, like, you know, you mentioned Elmira, and I know the Binghamton area was a popular area too. And I think here again, you know, they were playing on the circuits on the way to the town that they were going to. So I'm sure from here, from
to Utica, to Syracuse,
and to
then
Cleveland, down, maybe.
Then for the New York State League, at least, right. Then down to Elmira, down to Wilkes-Barre and
sure,
Scranton.
Sure.
And so you can imagine coming right back up and over to Albany.
Yeah.
They were part of it. So it was a local. They called it New York State League, but it was actually a circuit that had all these teams, including Pennsylvania.
Well, I mean, our area has always been rich in baseball. We had at the site where it used to be Walmart's up on off the Route 30 there. They had the Can-Am League, but that was much later.
Yeah, that was the interesting part of this project for anybody who knew baseball history in the Gloversville area. Everybody referred to the Glover's Park, which was at the on Fifth Ave extension, where the, to your point, where Walmart stood eventually. But that started as a field called Berkshire Field, which was the late 1800s. There was a horse track there, one of the fastest tracks. So you talk of Saratoga. There was a horse track there. They had fairs and carnivals, and then eventually in the 30s they started drawing some exhibition, and it was the Can-Am League. So much of the generation that has existed in Gloversville for the last 50, 60, 70 years, these generations knew that story. Sure. They didn't know the Parkhurst story. Exactly. And ironically, the one connection between both of those stories is Honus Wagner.
Okay.
He came back 30 years after playing at Parkhurst to manage the Pittsburgh team in an exhibition game at Glover's Park.
That's neat.
And there's a story that's out there that he reminisced coming to town 30 years before. So there's a really cool connection as baseball evolved and the next generation came through baseball. Well, our version of the next generation was Glover's Park.
Right. And, you know, I mean, and one common thread through the ages is the names of the players that came through. You know, when you talk about the greats of the turn of the century and up through Glover's Park, I mean, Honus Wagner, of course, in the early days, and then in the 50s, you had like Tommy Lasorda and a multitude of other famous players that came through. And what's funny is that Lasorda was a pitcher for the Montreal team, and they used to travel all over too. So we really have a rich history of baseball. But Parkhurst Field is especially really good because it's been I think it's as you mentioned, consistently been used as a baseball field.
That's correct. It has never stopped. It opened in 1906. The Parkhurst family took over the land in 1918, bought it as essentially for their employees. The Parkhurst factory was just up the road. They bought it as a family fun ground, if you will. But they continued the tradition of baseball in the park. And I mentioned the Reds team in the early 20s. So there was still exhibition baseball. There was still local industrial league. All the names that you would recognize, from Kenwell Sporting Goods to the Knox Gelatins played there. So imagine this great the fraternal leagues. The Knights of Columbus played there, and you can go on and on. So it was really for the teens. It was the early industrial league and all these barnstorming teams. In the 20s, that continued, and even into the 30s, we have stories of the House of David team coming to town, which is the their famous story, if you look them up, is everybody had long beards, and it was more actually, I almost referred to it as vaudeville baseball, right? So it was entertaining. The Detroit Clowns with a 3-foot catcher's mitt, and so it never stopped being for baseball. Right. And then in the 40s, it got a little quieter. The war was happening. There wasn't as much entertainment, if you will, but it continued, and the really the youth baseball movement started in the 40s, and then Gloversville Little League took over in 1955.
Now, I played in the 60s, and probably 62. And most of the teams then were named after the leather mills. I mean, I played on Ideal Leather, which was a big leather outfit at the time, and then you had St. Thomas and all the other ones. But one of the things, and I don't know how old it is, but one of the things that made our games really lively was trying to breathe, because we had the sewer field
across the street. I have pictures of that being built in the early 1900s, and in the distance is the state-of-the-art ballpark, which of course the Jags had already moved on about 10 years earlier.
Right.
But it wasn't much it was during that Industrial League era that was being built across the street. Bad spot for it.
Oh yeah, well, they used the game started at 6:00, and that's when the water sprays would come, like lawn sprinklers today would come on, and if you could make it through a whole game back then, you were considered a good baseball player.
Little mental toughness. Teach the kids well.
Oh, you know what, though? It was such a part of our life we never thought about.
Well, it does speak to the industrial nature of and the infrastructure that was growing around this place. Gloversville was the industrial leather capital of the world.
Right.
And you talk about the support of baseball through industry. There are just countless number. I talked about Kenwell Sporting Goods as an example. All the major glove companies, or the leather for the glove companies, were here to support baseball. You had Dodgeville Bats supporting baseball. Of course, everybody knows what's going on in Cooperstown, really starting in the 30s. This entire upstate New York region supported the early years of baseball.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was one of the pillars of the baseball building, let's say. I mean, you had the beginnings of baseball, and the field was part of that beginnings. So.
It absolutely it not only was part of the beginning, but it mirrored. If you watch the wonderful series by Ken Burns about baseball and all the different chapters and generations every decade of baseball, Parkhurst actually mirrored that as it was going on, from the early barnstorming to the Negro League teams to the Industrial League. You watch that series, and Parkhurst was part of every one of those eras over the last 100 years.
And just think about the historical periods that it was part of through those generations. I mean, from early 1900s, you had World War I in the teens, and you had World War II, but in between you had all kinds of skirmishes, the Depression, and the field still stands.
Yeah, it really... eventually the grandstands, after the Parkhurst family bought the land in 1918, they used what was the grandstands and boarded it up to make it a warehouse, a storehouse, they called it. But baseball still happened on the diamond in front of it. So that came down sometime in the early 50s. We've never identified exactly why or how, but there were old-timers in the area who reminisced that was part of the New York State League.
Okay.
So you can see somewhere in around World War II was really the end of that era of Parkhurst and what was there and the history of there, to this young Gloversville Little League sprouting up, and for the next 60 years, seldomly did people reference back to that New York State League, to that thing that happened in the early 1900s. It almost, essentially until 2010 when we started doing this research, it really disappeared to history.
Yeah.
And I think a major part of that was World War II, the end of the era of the ballpark that we knew, and the beginnings of all the men who came back from World War II and wanted to build a place for their children to have recreation and community and everything else. So, and the Parkhurst family, not to be missed in that entire story, they bought this place in 1918. They continued to use it and put on baseball and be part of the community. And then on a handshake deal from the mid-50s all the way into the early 90s, they just let Gloversville Little League use their land.
Wow.
So this story, and the reason the place will always be known as Parkhurst Field, is that family is a centerpiece of the story. How many times would somebody let 9 acres of land just be used and built on and fenced and everything in support of the community on a handshake deal?
Sure.
For 40 years.
Right. And not to the same extent, but another largest industry in the area was in Johnstown, and people don't know about this, is that Knox Gelatin started in Johnstown, New York. But a lot of their property donations to the city, you have high school on the property, you have Knox Field, which is a really neat field because it's kind of like a bowl, like a college stadium would be today. So you had a lot of people that owned industries, big industries in the area that were good to the communities, and the sports was a great outlet for them because it involved a lot of people in the communities, but
in a way, through all this research and all these eras, and you got the baseball buffs and the Hall of Famers and the Negro League stories and on and on and on. In a way, in my mind, as I look back at what we've learned in 10 years, is Parkhurst and the grandstands and the property was really a melting pot for the community. It doesn't matter young or old, or white or black, or man or woman. There was a all women's league team that came, Bloomer Girls, in 1900. It didn't matter your social, economic, or background.
Right.
You came to the ballpark, you paid your quarter or your 50 cents to see a game, and it was really the centerpiece of the community. Yeah. And I think that could be said for a lot of even the ballparks these days.
Now, did you do any research on the all-female team?
Yeah, it was called the New York Bloomer Girls.
Okay.
If you actually go to the Hall of Fame, there's a section in there that references them and their contributions for the first 20 years of baseball. But they traveled as an all-women's team. They were based out of New York City, and they would play all men's teams.
That's neat.
In this case, it was the Danforths.
Okay.
And the article in 1914, when they came to Parkhurst, the article in the paper the next day said that the gentlemen were so ungallant as to pound the ball all over the field.
I can imagine.
they beat up on the women, and
well, back then it was.
But the thing that it was real baseball.
Sure.
And they were really talented. They could match up with anybody. And that's what a great story. And that was years before suffrage, before the right to vote.
Right. Well, I think that actually I had heard, again, this could be legend, that there was an all-girls league. And that's why I had mentioned the girls from Hawaii, because there was supposed to be a team from Hawaii called the Hula Hoops. And
you're really going back to that.
I'm going back to that. Yeah,
I gotta research that now.
Yeah, you're gonna have to research that. But I think a little bit on the start of the demise of local area teams, and this is another reason why Parkhurst is amazing, that it stayed a baseball field since 1906 or is that a lot of the stadiums were built out of wood, of course.
Yeah.
And a lot of even the Major League Baseball stadiums burned down. And I know
many of them.
Many of them.
That was the biggest culprit for these old parks coming down.
Sure. And I know the Amsterdam was a minor league team of the Yankees at one point, and their stadium burned down. I mean, they had a state-of-the-art stadium also. So, I mean, you know, they had to hurt the individual areas because to rebuild a stadium had to be kind of an expensive deal.
You started to see in the 1910 range a lot of these old parks, the Boston Park and alike, move towards more concrete structures. So they were starting to introduce a more solid infrastructure rather than just timber. And in fact, one of the really neat other connections, and I keep tossing out names and connections, but the Pittsburgh team came to Gloversville in 1907, and a man, his last name was Lucas, from town, was basically the guy who maintained and built the infield, the structure, if you will, not the grandstands, but the structure of the ballpark itself and the drainage and everything that we would do today. He actually, after they left town, they contacted him and had him build Forbes Field.
Wow.
3 years later, and actually 2 years later, it opened in 1909 with, again, concrete structure, a little more of that. But he was there, essentially what we would call head groundskeeper and designer of their infield for Forbes Field.
That's pretty neat.
Yeah, great connection. But a lot of the ballparks then were starting to evolve.
Switch over. Yeah. Well, I mean, you look at Yankee Stadium that was built in the 20s, and it stood until, 2009, was it?
Right.
So, I mean, you know, they did introduce concrete, and then later into the early 20s, probably a lot of metal too, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
But so you started the foundation to promote the history of Parkhurst and try to make it a centerpiece of the area. And you have a connection with Cooperstown also, don't you?
We do, actually, because we have uncovered so much of this great history that had been lost to history. We've actually been invited and given multiple speeches now to the SABRE group, which is the Society of American Baseball Research, to anybody that would come in an open session. We've been able to tell this story in Cooperstown, in their theater room, in front of audiences, and all our research that we're talking about today has actually been handed over and preserved in their library forevermore.
That's neat.
So the story will exist for as long as Cooperstown and the Hall of Fame exists. Library, it's been preserved.
Let's hope it lasts for another 20 generations.
Oh, so, you know, and that was really the defining moment. Now that we've learned this history, what do you really do with it, right? What's going to prevent it from being lost to history again? Sure. 50 years from now and 75 years from now? And it was really the crowning achievement that we haven't talked about yet today that really determined the launch of the foundation. And that was the realization that a central figure from the movie Field of Dreams played on this park also.
Neat.
And everybody knows that's seen the movie, The Field of Dreams. You have Moonlight Doc Graham, who is the doctor, played by Burt Lancaster, immortalized in his famous story is he made it up to the majors, was on deck for his first at-bat ever. The guy before him makes the last out, and he's sent down to the minor leagues and never to get an at-bat. So he's pained by never getting this major league at-bat, and he talks to Kevin Costner in the movie about it.
Yeah.
And it is a central part of that movie. Well, what they don't tell you in the movie is that when he was sent down to the minors, he didn't hang it up like they told you in the movie. And it wasn't 1922 like they said in the movie, so there was some creative license. when he was sent down to the minors, he went to play for the Scranton Miners. And if you remember earlier when I told you about the New York State League, it included Scranton.
Okay.
So that team came to Gloversville with Moonlight Doc Graham, who was just known as Archibald Graham at the time. Mm-hmm. And we have 7 documented games that he played on Parkhurst Field in 1907 and 1906, the tail end of 6, and 1907. So it's the only field in America that this guy played on.
And had at-bats on.
And had at-bats on. And we have all the box scores. It was great to recognize that, to find that, and significant nationally. So that really led to a lot of the interest in Cooperstown and having that connection and them.
Of a little speck into their perspective of Parkhurst Field history.
Yeah, and we've been pretty blessed since launching this project and releasing what we've learned. Many of those have come forward to us.
Okay.
From a family who gave us a uniform from their grandfather from the 1920s Industrial League that's in our museum on site, to the generation who first built the ballpark as a Little League ballpark, who can recall from their childhood what was there before. Right. So we have documented much of that. We put some of it on film and did a little bit of a documentary and archived it. And as we continued to learn more, that is an integral part of the story. There aren't many people that remember the grandstands because that was 1930 when the last remnants of that people would be able to recall. But people, when you ask what it looked like in 1940s and 1950s as a Little League park, they're starting to recall. Oh yeah, that was over there. I never knew what that building may have been. Mm-hmm. Or so we've as much as we can. We've done an outreach, and I encourage anybody listening to this, if they have history of that park, whether it's an old photo albums or stories or letters or whatever, it all actually adds to the narrative and helps us build a very complete history and bridge those generations.
Sure. One of the things that's pretty neat now, is there anyone from the Parkhurst family that's still around that would have any of those records about the property being used, letting the city use the property or anything like that? Did Parkhurst ever keep records?
Priscilla Parkhurst Ferguson, she passed just in the last year or two.
Okay.
But she was a very integral part of telling stories about her father.
Okay.
Richard Parkhurst, who let everybody use the land. Yep. She shared stories with us. She supported what we were doing in a very kind way. She personally didn't have as much of a connection because she didn't play on the park, but her family connection was very strong and very community-minded. And so she was so gracious early on to share those stories and not as much memorabilia, but great conversations about how that evolved over the 30s, 40s, 50s, and her best memories of it. So it was terrific. It meant so much to her dad. To be able to do that for the community.
Well, I'm not sure when I was a kid if I know the name Richard Parkhurst. Now, it may have been his son, but I remember him being down at the park and being introduced, and it could have been the son because I don't know how old the father was.
It probably in your childhood memories, it was Mr. Parkhurst who owned Parkhurst Leather, and
I mean I can vaguely remember.
And he was honored into the 70s with awards and for all that he meant to the Little League.
Now, the daughter, was she married to Dudley Ferguson, the attorney?
No,
a different Ferguson.
Yep.
Oh, okay, all right.
But so and even he was very supportive of the Gloversville Little League aspect of it, and lost in all this. And if I can just kind of take a detour a little bit, everything that we're talking about today and the development plans that we'll talk about in a second is done in conjunction with Little League. This is owned by Gloversville Little League. This park is owned by Gloversville Little League. They bought it from the Parkhurst family in the early 1990s. Okay. Everything that we're doing is in cooperation with them. We have a 50-year lease agreement with them. If and when this is completed, that kicks in and begins the process of us bringing outside teams in after the Little League season is done.
Sure.
So Little League typically plays through the first week of July. All-Stars kicks in, and then the place sits idle July, August, September, and October. Now you can have a state-of-the-art facility that's used for these outside teams that helps sustain the park, that also potentially allows the local kids to play for free because tourism money has funded, and the Little League doesn't need to do all the fundraising that they have to do today just to keep the 9 acres up. So it's important to get that across, that it not only continues the Parker story but draws this outside tourism but supports the Little League first and foremost.
Now I can go back when Parkhurst Field, when I played on it, was only 2 fields. You had the minor league and then the major leagues. And it was everybody's dream when you played the minors. I think that was up to 12, age 12, I think. And then from 12 to 15.
No, I think the minors was up to around age 10.
Okay.
Then 11, 12s were always the Little League World Series, the majors.
Okay.
And then they even had a senior circuit.
Yeah, I was a manager in the senior circuit.
How'd you do?
Not too bad.
Right.
I mean, one of the nice things about Little League, if you're a purist, is that everybody played. There were some people that wanted to play their best players all the time, and so that they could take every game. And parents used to get upset because their child didn't get into the game in that. But there were quite a few managers who believed in the fact that every child played, no matter what their level of playing was. So when I coached, I had a twins on my team, and they couldn't play baseball. They tried, but and you had to give them a lot of respect for trying. So and myself and one of my best friends were managing, and this, my gosh, had to be in the late 70s or mid 70s. So they couldn't hit worth beans. Okay, so what I told him to do, but he had such a funny smile. So what I told him to do when he went up to bat is just look at the pitcher and smile. And he walked. Every time he was at bat, he got a walk. So at least he was on base.
That has a Moonlight connection to the movie. He gets up to the plate when he finally gets his at bat at the Field of Dreams, and he winks at the pitcher.
Right. Okay.
You were ahead of your time.
I guess so. But it was so cute but he was on base every time he was at bat.
Well, I'll admit I had 1 year of Gloversville Little League in the 70s. It was when you were down there telling that story. I played an entire season. Didn't get a single hit.
Really?
Yeah, so I was one of those kids.
But you know what?
You
played. You have
I loved it.
Yeah.
I loved it. I think they played me behind the right field fence, though, on defense.
Well, that's okay. I don't know why
home run
right
territory
field was always the field where you put somebody that couldn't field that well.
That was me.
A lot of left-handed batters back then.
I did that part of the field, though, was picked clean of dandelions and was the best manicured part of the park. So
you know what? You were part of Parkhurst Field legend.
Yeah, exactly.
I even umpired games when I was in my. I didn't go on to the senior league, but I umpired games for the minor league and the major leagues. And the worst part about that was when the mothers used to scream at you and yell at you. And I just, after 1 year, I just couldn't take it anymore. I mean, there were some really violent, here you are, a kid, a teenager umpiring the game, and, they went really nuts. And so anyway, great memories of growing up on Parkhurst. Now, we have a special guest, and before we get to the last part of the show, I'd like to invite him on so that, and I'm going to let you introduce him so that we can get some of his...
Actually, part of the inspiration for this project, the reason I got involved in Gloversville Little League is because my son Michael started playing there, and when he was about seven years old, absolutely had the passion for baseball, absolutely drove me to do better for that organization and for that park. And so we brought Michael today. He has done these speeches at the Hall of Fame with me. He's participated in every part of this project, including, I would say, about a third of the research that we have. And in fact, the section that talks about major leaguers and all the famous major leaguers and less famous major leaguers that who've played at the park, Michael did all the research. As at the time, he's 17 now. So when he was 8, 9, 10 years old, he's on the internet searching this in support of this project. So we brought Michael today, and he's here in the studio.
Michael, just a few questions warming up before. 17, you going into your senior year?
Yeah, that's right, I am.
Okay. You looking forward to getting back to school?
Well, if there is a school year,
right.
I hope to be part of it, but...
you're tentative.
Yeah,
you're tentative. I think everybody is worrying about that, but... Did you miss when the pandemic started? Did you miss just having to stop school in the middle without any kind of foresight in what was going to happen?
Yeah, it was hard to go from seeing all these people that you know and having this routine that you've built for 10 years or however long I've been since kindergarten, 10, 11 years of this routine every year just shut down.
Yeah.
And never experienced anything like this before, and I don't know if we'll ever experience something like this again.
Well,
hopefully not.
It's been 102 years since we experienced it before, and I think they made a comment during the thing. There was a lady that was born, she was a year old, I think, during the pandemic, and she survived that, and she survived one other thing. I can't remember what it was, and then she survived this pandemic.
God bless her.
Yeah. But I mean, I wondered what it was like from the view of a student,
Yeah. I mean, we had the ability to still connect socially with our phones and over remote learning, but it's not the same.
No,
it's really not.
And so much of our lives today, a healthy life is to socialize.
Yeah, very true.
And when you're peer-to-peer, you can't do that anymore, and it's great that you have a great relationship with your dad. And, a lot of kids don't have that, or, they'd rather be outside with their friends rather than inside. It's tough, but I'm glad you're doing well, and you obviously adapted well for the problems we've been going through. So you did a lot of research on the older professional teams, correct?
Yeah, I did.
All right. Nothing about hula hoops.
Nothing yet, but I'm going to make sure I'll do my research at home.
I want you to do
I'll
research,
start that today.
but you're a good researcher, so you start that. So tell me about your background in researching this, the interest that it gave you.
Well, if I'll take it back even a little bit farther, I as a kid, really little, I still remember having a little Lincoln log set with green pipes in it. It was a truck, right? And we found these foam practice golf balls that you'd hit in your yard so you could work on your swing. And I remember my dad throwing them to me in the old house, and I'd hit them around as a 3-year-old kid with this little pipe.
He had an aptitude and a desire to be swinging what was a Lincoln log bat at the time.
I even put tape on it, like plastic, clear tape.
His love for baseball goes back to when he could barely even walk.
Well, you know what? That was just like us. We grew up on Judson Street up on top of the hill, and there was, I don't know if you ever remember this, but there was a little field up there. And wiffle ball was a big thing when we were, before we could play Little League. And, you know, wiffle balls to us as kids were expensive. I mean, you know, if they were 25 cents, we didn't have that. I mean, we used to buy comics for 2 cents a piece at a candy store that didn't have covers on them, because back then, when they put the new comic books in, instead of taking the comics back, they'd rip the covers off and the store could sell them for whatever, a couple pennies. So we would tape our wiffle balls up so to make them last longer. And then but when they got to be the size of softballs, then that was the time to go get a new wiffle ball. But then you do the same thing with plastic bats. You tape them when they cracked. And but you know what? When you look back at that was fun.
Yeah, it is.
A lot of fun, you know.
It is. I remember we had like a little table because our living room was our start where I was batting.
Okay.
And the dining room was where right field would be. So I remember a little wooden table. If I got it on there, that was a home run. Or there's the fridge.
Okay.
That was a tough one. That one was a bit higher. That was like the Green Monster.
That's too much fun.
But yeah, the love of baseball started really young. So as a kid, I can remember playing video games, my baseball video games, and for some reason I was always attached to the numbers.
Okay.
I always loved looking at batting averages and how many home runs someone hit. And for some reason that was fascinating to me. So when it came to the age where I was able to start getting involved in Gloversville Little League when I started playing, just a couple years after that, when this project started, I took a huge interest in it because as a kid who enjoys history and enjoys numbers, talking about both of those at the same time while it being baseball related was like the best of both worlds for me.
Excellent. And your research must have been tedious at some points, correct?
I can still remember the English muffins with peanut butter sitting in front of me. I wouldn't have my breakfast. I would just grab those and go. And I could still remember sprinting out of the house many different mornings to try to make the bus because I got too involved with looking at these numbers and trying to figure out if anyone else was at this park, and being so involved in that I would almost miss my school bus.
Now imagine if we didn't have computers, and you know, I mean, you had to go to the library and do so much research that they probably wouldn't have even had the little information that you know you and your dad have brought forth.
Probably
in research, you know, but you enjoyed it. What was you played Little League?
I did. I've played since about 7 years old. I started in intermediate.
Okay.
When I think I was 7, and still playing to this day. I play travel baseball, and last year I umpired Little League, and I'm hoping to become a coach soon, get involved in that.
Excellent.
And I just love the youth baseball, involvement. I love watching kids who love the game play and learn and grow from it, because I can see myself in that. Even though I'm only a couple years older than them, I can see myself and how I grew through that too.
Well, I worked with a fellow when I worked at the Holiday Inn through high school whose father was a major league umpire from Johnstown, and Wilmot was his last name. He ended up becoming our insurance agent when I was younger, but and you know, like I said, our area is so rich in history that it's not funny. But see, that when you played Little League, the design of the field had changed quite a bit from when I played. Yeah, because you had how many fields were there?
There was it was more than a handful. It was T-ball, intermediate, minors, majors, the senior field, so the softball fields too in the back there. Okay. So there was quite a few fields, and the minors field I remember being short, but still long enough for me so I couldn't hit anything out.
Okay.
I'm a contact hitter by design.
Well, I was too. I mean, I never had power, but, you know, I mean, I could get on base.
Okay, so can either of you tell me what that felt like? Because I told you.
I was going to make that joke, but I decided to save it for you.
You were going to go there, weren't you?
I was.
Good. Let me tell you, it felt good.
I did walk, so I got on base. I just didn't get a base hit.
But with two fields, you had much more room to maneuver and keep the fields a little farther apart so you could have two games going on at the same time without, being on top of each other. But that's good. So you enjoyed Little League, and you're enjoying the history and the research and putting this together.
Yeah, I love it. I just had a conversation with my dad. In fact, I'm going to try to start getting involved in the social media side of things, trying to work that aspect. Now that I have the capabilities to do so, and try to learn that side of it so I can help grow this in ways that I'm able to.
Sure.
You know.
And when your father gets too old and can't remember things, then you'll take over his spot.
So in a few years.
So yeah. And then
it's actually led to his passion, and he's going into his senior year and has a desire to take this on as a career. Not Parkhurst, but
baseball.
He wants his major and minor to be business and sports marketing.
Oh, excellent. That's neat.
Yeah.
Don't forget me. Okay.
I won't. I'll make sure to make it a point to stop by if I
and do a show.
Yeah, if I have the schedule for it. In fact, I'm taking a class next year on internship.
Okay.
And I'm trying to get an internship in the sports business world somewhere.
Neat.
In communications and any of those.
Well, I don't know how much I can help you. This year I can't because I'm not working at the track. But if your dad brings you at the track, my post is the press box. I am the security guard for the press box, so I can have you talk with the press box director, who's also a college professor at Hudson Valley. So I can do that anytime. I mean, if you want to sit down with him, especially since you're a senior, he can give you some points. So I'll talk to you after the show, and I can even make the connection, and we can go out for coffee at some point, and then you can take over.
I'd love to do that.
Yeah.
I can't wait to get that career started, and if I'm able to do something in business where I excel as a student and still keep it in that sports focus where I've grown up and loved it from the minute I was born, that would be a dream.
You know, I mean, not in the same field, but
what's been neat about this project for us together, obviously we bonded through this, but it has opened up a lot of doors. You know, you go to the Hall of Fame and give a speech there. Michael was able to meet and become good acquaintances with the head curator of the New York Yankee Museum, who offered his assistance and research and everything else. And you know, even this morning, just this conversation, any teenage kid would love to sleep till noon, I suspect.
Oh, yeah. I do that every other day anyway.
you get a chance to do that anyways.
I'd like to sleep till noon. You kidding me?
It's amazing the when you put yourself out there and a project out there and you dedicate your time and energy to it, doors open and ideas open and things happen. So I really appreciate that offer to Michael.
But see, the thing is, and when I'll relate this back to when we started talking about, you know, being out of school and that, so much of our life is socialization, whether it be in school with your peers or making connections like your dad just said. And when you have that taken away from you, it's kind of hard.
Yeah,
you know?
It is.
But okay, Dave, I want to get back to you now. Thanks, Michael, for that. We've got phases. We'll quickly go through the phases and then what you'd like maybe to get.
Yeah, sure. So to finish one of the earlier trains of thought, the New York State. So the foundation started about 5 years ago. We formed the nonprofit foundation. New York State awarded us a $500,000 economic development grant, which is not sitting in our bank account today. We have to finish the project to get the money, which is worth noting. But they recognized that if we built a destination, a ballpark that would bring 10 teams a week or more, actually 16 teams a week we could fit on the field for 10 weeks during the summer, it has an absolute positive economic impact to the area. Mm-hmm. So New York State recognized that, awarded us this grant, and it really, at that point, jump-started our capital campaign, which you can see on our website, parkhursfield.org. It's a $2.5 million capital campaign to build out the park, put the grandstands in a half-scale model exactly where they were in 1906. We've retriangulated everything. The home plate exactly where it was. So Little League-aged kids from anywhere around the country can come, travel, play travel ball, come to Parkhurst Field and see the museum under the grandstands, understand the rich history of the area and its support of baseball, the rich history of the park, and then literally stand in the same batter's box that Moonlight Doc Graham was in, or on the pitcher's mound that Cy Young came with his team. So building it out as a destination is what we decided we needed to do to keep this story and this legacy alive of Parkhurst Field. And we're right now to the point where we're starting to clear land, and starting to develop for phase 1 of this development plan. So you kind of have to understand the layout of the land. You do, because you were down there. What used to be the senior field, which is a regulation 90-foot field with the woods behind it on Industrial Parkway, is phase 1. And if you can imagine 3, I'm going to say encased fields, fenced-in fields, wood-fenced-in classic-look green fields, 3 of those to replace what is currently the unused senior field and the woods. Okay. And we've already gone through all the permitting. We have our building permits. We have all the environmental work done. All the stuff that is not very sexy but is very necessary to get off the ground. We're 4 years into this, and if you count taking trees down, we've just started pushing dirt. Okay. But in-kind or cash donations to this point is in excess of $200,000 just to get to this point where we can start talking about building. So those 3 fields are phase 1, and that ranges between $500,000 and $1 million to accomplish that. A lot of infrastructure work, a lot of water lines and sewer lines and things that need to be done. Infrastructure. Anybody who's driven past there in the last 6 months saw that we took down the wooded area, which many of those trees were actually very dangerous, leaning over the senior field. We've cleared that. It paused as New York State paused, and in the next week or two, we will clean up that area, plant some wild grass until we can get to actually building the 3 fields. So that's in progress. The idea is to build those in a season, and the Little League can use those fields literally the next season. Okay. Then phase 2 is the front of the facility. It's the heavy lift. It's the grandstands. It's the new concession stand, which is in the same look and feel of the players' clubhouse that sat on. We have the old blueprints for the players' clubhouse, so a real turn of the century feel. The grandstands are literally half scale model, but built just like they were back then. With some modern amenities, we'll have aluminum bleachers inside it, so that's sort of sustainable. It won't be the structure around it will be wood, so it's going to look classic with a lot of modern amenities, and that's phase 2. That is essentially another $1 million. Okay, and if you're keeping track, we're now between 1.5 and 2. And then phase 3, which really is the pathways, the lighting, everything will be pre-wired to light all the fields with LED lighting. So there will be night games that would be able to be played down there. And for the first time ever, fall ball for Little League, because they would have lighted fields. Sure. So all in all, it's a 2.5, possibly to $3 million. Depending on where the quotes come in, project over a 3-year period.
Now, obviously things cost quite a bit today, and you have the luck of having a couple good fundraisers, and I think we'd be remiss without mentioning them.
So we I'm incredibly blessed to have a board really of multi-talents and advisors who have helped us. The board is 15 volunteers, from anybody from economic development to building, And I'm not going to pick out individual names just because it wouldn't be fair unless I named all 15.
Sure.
But from web design to construction to the actual design of the ballpark, the architectural drawings were done all by our volunteer board, and then with community involvement to stamp the drawings, to make it official. And the fundraising, everybody's involved in the fundraising. And really have brought forth some really significant early donors. It's really the quiet part of fundraising that you try to get about half of it funded before you turn it over to the community.
Sure.
To bring you over the hurdle. And we're in that philanthropic quiet part of the commitments that are coming in, and we have significant commitments already.
Good. Excellent. Now, what are you looking for as far as community involvement? You're always looking for volunteers, obviously, because there's so many different aspects of this, like clearing the fields or whatever. I mean,
yeah, to have a real effective board and to develop a board, you really need volunteers who are passionate about the project, want to, in this case, leave a legacy for the next generations, to whether it's the economic development angle or for the kids or for the history, whatever your passion is that might be inspired by this project. We need those board members, and the biggest challenge of a nonprofit board is obviously raising the money, and so we'll take anybody that has talents that they want to lend to the project, but what we really need is people who are telling the story, sharing the story, setting us up to have the significant asks for for contributions to it. And not a lot of people are very comfortable talking about money and the needs.
Oh yeah.
But what we're asking of our board is just make the connections.
Yeah.
I can come and do this conversation, and a lot of philanthropy is very personal. Mm-hmm. It's a personal connection. It's a family. It's a company that has left a foundation, whatever it is. So what we need is those volunteers, whether it's pushing dirt and making things happen, or website, or building, or grounds, or fundraising. We need all that expertise. Sure. And the reality is, and you mentioned the key word, it's all volunteer. None of us make a penny doing what we're doing.
I can imagine.
And for somebody to give their time to develop this and to create this outreach, it is amazing what more hands will do. Mm-hmm. So you don't need to give 40 hours a week to make this happen. What we need is those few hours here and there that open up doors. Okay. And so the community, what we're looking for is to continue to develop this board and or subcommittees, maybe not even a full board membership. Just come forward and say, hey, I've got an idea, and help us over that next hurdle.
Will there be a museum on property?
Yeah, so there is today. First of all, there in the current concession stands, we built a small museum that tells the story that we're telling today, including a lot of Little League history. Mm-hmm. And you can see it again at our website. There is a underneath the grandstands. If you enter from the back side of the grandstands, there will be on the right side, there will be a full museum that will tell everything from the rich history of the area and the glove support and who the Jags were and the major league teams and the Field of Dreams connection all the way through Little League. And on the other side, because it's a three-angle grandstand, on the other side would be our gift shop and memorabilia and everything else that would help sustain the field.
Excellent. All right. Well,
foundation for everyone
it is, and
to hear.
This area has probably a connection with that too. So, you have a great day.
Thank you.
It's supposed
Thanks,
to
Rick.
be a very